Hello and welcome to the Academic Learning Centre's presentation for EDED11458. This is a very short introduction to the topic of identity. My name is Dr. Karen Stokes. Before we begin, I'd like you to pause this recording and list 5 words that describe your identity. Now that you have your 5 words, I'd like you to put them aside and let's now consider what actually is identity. We'll come back to that list later. There are a number of differing disciplines that all have views on the topic of identity. The 3 ones that we use here in the Western world are psychology, which is basically an essentialist view, anthropology, which is a traditionalist view, and sociology, which is a critical view. For psychology, the key terms are all about self-image, which is a mental model of the self, self-esteem, which is all about awareness of yourself and your interactions with others, so your ability to reflect, and individuality, which is all about difference and the role behaviours that you carry out on a day-to-day basis. From anthropology, we get the ideas of belonging, and that's all got to do with ancestry and biology. We also have distinction, which is basically political differences. Now, that's not just your politics in terms of government, but it's all sorts of differences in your mental viewpoint about things. The sociology version are twofold. One of them is called the social version, which is classified through the acronym CAGES, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And the other is the collective version, which we can see through the acronym HSCC. So let's have a look at those in a little bit more detail. Of the differing definitions, psychology is all about the concept of nature when it talks about personal identity. Role identity, on the other hand, is all about the individual's activity in the particular roles that they are carrying out. In anthropology, status is basically a concept of a personal role, that is a specific specialised role that you play alongside other roles within your society. And function is the concept of a group need. In other words, the role that you play has a specific function for the purpose of the group cohesion. In sociology, the social format is all about the concept of nurture, and often psychology's personal idea, that is nature, and sociology's social idea and nurture are the 2 areas that are usually compared and contrasted against one another. But there are other viewpoints, as you already can see. For sociology, the collective identity is all about a concept of group activities and how groups function. So let's have a look at the psychological concept in a little bit more detail. The personal concept implies that there is an unchanging status, that it arises from the genetic code and that there is very little that anyone can do about changing that personal identity. We often hear the saying, they were born that way. Well, that's what personal psychological concepts are about. In terms of role identity, it implies that every one of us has multiple faces, and these arise from different responsibilities that we have for various different things that we do throughout our lives. So we might have parent versus child, teacher versus student, worker versus the unemployed. Each one of these has different responsibilities, and so therefore we have a different face to carry out those jobs. From the anthropological concepts, we find that status is an ascribed concept as far as your identity is concerned. You are given a location, a status within your society from birth. Now, in terms of anthropology, that could mean that you are from a warrior group, or you might, as a result of a specific accident of birth, you might be the chief's child. And so therefore there are certain things that are expected of you, certain things that will be taught to you that that are different to the training that other people from different ascriptions will have. As well as that, status can also be acquired, and this is generally developed through skills. And an example here would be a person who is showing, as a youngster, a fairly good understanding or curiosity about certain things, and might even be trained as the group's medicine man. As well as this, anthropological concepts include function, and the functions of all identity as a group function is its group cohesion and non-individuality. You look at the way in which the society works, that particular group or tribe, whatever the size of the group is, they work for a common purpose, and so therefore individuals aren't as important as the results that the entire group gets. We also have cultural and social determinism. That is, there are things that are expected and are predetermined as a result of the way in which that group does things. So we've always done it this way, and so that's the way it's going to be. And so function, of course, becomes this very major concept of tradition. So here we have tradition as an anthropological form of identity creation. We also have an idea of the plurality of selves, so you can actually have different roles to play within that group. So at one stage you might be a parent, another stage you might be a hunter, at another stage you might be someone who has to do the healing. It all depends on the particular role that you need to carry out at that particular time. Now, this plurality of selves is all about reflexivity, the self and agency. What can you see yourself doing? What do you think the group is doing? How do you fit into that? And what choices do you have that enables you to make changes? We also have age sets and rites of passage. Those don't seem to be quite so common in our Western structure of living, but nevertheless we still segregate children at school according to their age sets, and there are still some rites of passage that may not necessarily be formalised, but we still undergo them. Girls in particular will undergo a rite of passage with their first menses, and boys, of course, with their first nocturnal ejaculations. Those things are all ways of expressing that you are moving from one form of identity into another form of identity. And the other major area here is that of kinship relations, particularly in among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Kinship relations are extremely complex, and they are very important in being able to locate yourself and your identity within the entire Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander communities across all of Australia. We know that there are multiple communities, and we know that there are multiple ways in which kinship relations can be carried out. The sociological critiques of identity have the cages perspective, and this is basically linked to your life chances and the outcomes that occur as a result of the sort of life that you are able to exist within. There are a number of issues to consider in the cages perspective. The first of these is class. That's what the C stands for. And this is all about the social hierarchy. Then we have age. That is, what are the power differentials that keep you in one form or another? And you'll notice that, of course, power differentials change over the lifespan. When you are very young, you have no power at all. As you grow into young adulthood, you begin to create some power. And by the time you are old and decrepit and falling apart, once again, you are reverted back to having very little power over what happens to you. So age is a very important aspect to consider when one looks at identity. Gender is another one, that's the G part. And here we have a sexual hierarchy. That is, boys are considered to be more important than girls, and that's pretty well accepted on most societies, and definitely in our Western society, that girls are subservient. Then we have ethnicity. Now, this is where we have a racial hierarchy. And across the world, due to colonisation and a number of pretty nasty habits of people who were the colonisers and also the missionaries, is that we've created a racial hierarchy. White people consider themselves to be the top of the hierarchy, and the darker your skin, the less likely you are going to be valued in this particular form of identity and in society generally. So it's a very important one to consider when you're looking at your identity. Then we have sexuality or difference, and this is how individuals can be marginalised even if they fit the criteria of the top tier of class, age, gender and ethnicity. If the sexuality is wrong, or if the difference, say someone has a physical disability, then they are going to experience marginalisation, even if everything else is quite normal. Cages always imply that there's some form of inequality going on. And I guess in a way you've figured that out by now. The class is all about the haves versus the have-nots. Age is all about levels of competence, how we view you as being able to do something, and how you view yourself and others around you. Gender is all about male privilege, ethnicity is all about white privilege, and sexuality and difference is all about the heterosexual imperative or abledness. In other words, only normal people with normal identities are considered by the mass population to be normal if they are heterosexual, and the same goes for normality is very rarely considered to be the case when we're looking at someone who has any form of deficit or disability, and that includes, by the way, mental health disabilities. The second type of sociological critique is the HSCC perspective, and this one actually offers a method of analysing society and culture. There are a number of paradigms to explore, and each one of these can be explored in a number of different ways. H stands for history, and always when something comes up as being the norm in our lives, or the norm as the way we organise our identity, you have to ask yourself, okay, where did it originate? When did it originate? Why did it originate? And then we go for structure. How is that particular idea, how is that identity, how is that life organised? What keeps that organisation in place is all about culture. And then finally, critique, how could it be different? So if we give an example of this, let's deconstruct some norms. We do that by using the HSCC model to look at the problems and then using it again to define some solutions. So history says it wasn't always this way. Yes, it may have been that way in our lifetimes and maybe our parents' lifetimes and maybe in their parents' lifetimes, but it wasn't always that way. In terms of solutions, you might want to reconsider some of the traditions. Why are we still doing things that way simply because that's the way it was always done? Is that really a good enough rationale, a good enough justification? In terms of structure, structure always serves hegemony. Hegemony is means that it's the status quo is upheld. So the structure, or the problem with structure, is that the status quo, in other words, those people at the top of the hierarchy, benefit most, regardless of what the hierarchy is. The solution, of course, is to challenge that hierarchy. Let's see if we can get some changes made to the structure of how we interact with one another. And then we have culture. Culture's problem is that slow social change occurs over many generations. Sometimes it occurs more rapidly, and that's usually aided by some form of technological advancement. But generally, culture changes slowly. And we like to hang on to culture. But the solution is, how about we invite some revolution? Revolutionary thinking. We don't actually have to go out and shoot each other, but we can decide that we're not going to do it that way anymore. We're going to do it differently. And the problem with critique is that whenever a critique is made of the status quo, a backlash occurs. That backlash is generally goes back to the structure, and that is it serves hegemony to make sure that people maintain their identity in the lines that are allocated to them and that they don't threaten those at the top of the pile. The solution, of course, in critique is finding an alternative way to be and then imposing that on ourselves. So let's have a look back to those 5 words that you used right at the beginning to describe your identity. What discipline did you use? Did you use psychology? Did you use anthropology? Or did you use the sociological concepts? What implications arise from the discipline that you used? Are you thinking of yourself only as some unique individual completely outside society or the tribal group or the culture that they belong to? Or are you able to see your identity as simply one more part of a giant machine that makes up social life? How would you classify your identity now? Let's go back to the initial question. Once again, pause this recording and this time write down 5 words that describe your identity using the CAGES acronym. What class do you belong to? What age group? What is your gender? What ethnic group do you belong to? And what is your sexuality? Or what other differences do you have that make you unique within your society? Now compare those words against your first list. Do you have a better understanding? I hope so. Here are some references of books and papers that I've used to get this presentation together. Feel free to contact me if you want more information. Thank you.